The moment I realized my manager was gone, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. It was just empty. Monday morning, 8:17, I sent him a quick question about a client deck we were due to deliver by Wednesday. The message showed delivered, like always. No reply. By 10:30, he still hadn't reacted to anything in Slack. No calendar updates, no out of office, nothing. It felt like the office had swallowed him whole and decided not to burp. I told myself the normal things at first. Dentist appointment, family emergency, lost his phone, took a mental health day and forgot to set ooh because he's the type who thinks he's invincible. I've covered for managers before. Everyone has. You don't panic on day one. You keep the machine moving. My role is mid-level. Enough responsibility to feel the heat, not enough authority to turn off the stove. I run analysis for a team that supports sales and operations, forecasting, pricing reviews, vendor coordination, the kind of work where one missing approval can stall an entire chain, and then somehow it's still your fault. My manager, Jared, was the gate. He didn't do the work so much as bless it. He'd skim, ask one vaguely critical question to prove he'd looked, then forward it to leadership with his name on top. So Monday, I did what I always do when Jared is slow. I triangulated. I pinged his calendar to see if he was in a meeting. Nothing. I checked if he'd joined the weekly leadership huddle. Not listed. I asked his assistant, technically not my place, but we weren't close enough to call it gossip. She answered in that careful tone assistants use when they're already managing someone else's mess. Haven't heard from him this morning, she said. He didn't flag anything. Okay, fine. People disappear for half a day. It happens. By lunch, it stopped feeling normal. Jared was the kind of person who couldn't resist the dopamine of being needed. Even on vacation, he'd pop into threads just to say, let's circle back. His absence wasn't quiet. It was unnatural. Like when the fridge stops humming and you only notice because the silence feels wrong. Tuesday morning, I came in early and started doing his job the way I'd done it a dozen times. I opened the shared drive, pulled the latest deck, and made sure our numbers reconciled with finance's snapshot. I drafted the email he usually sent to leadership and left the from blank because I didn't want to impersonate him. I wasn't trying to play hero. I was trying to keep my team from getting crushed for something outside our control. At 9:12, something happened that made my skin go cold. Our vendor rep emailed me. Thanks for Jared's approval. We'll proceed with the revised scope. Revised scope? I stared at that phrase for a long time. I hadn't sent any approval. No one on my team had authority to approve scope changes, and Jared, if he was missing, couldn't have approved anything either. My first thought was that the vendor was mistaken. They mix up names all the time. I replied politely, asked them to forward the thread, and told myself this was going to be a dumb misunderstanding I'd laugh about later. They forwarded it. The email from Jared looked real. Same signature, same corporate disclaimer, even the little flourish he always added. Appreciate you moving quickly on this. The timestamp was Monday evening, 7:46 p.m. I checked my phone. I checked Slack again. Nothing. No message from Jared. No, hey, I'm offline but handle X. He hadn't replied to anyone since Monday morning. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Delegated mailbox. Scheduled send. Assistant stepping in and signing his name because he was incommunicado and deadlines didn't care. All of those possibilities were still within the realm of messy but human. Then came the second weird thing. On Tuesday afternoon, our internal approval workflows pinged me that a pricing exception had been reviewed by manager and moved to the next step. I clicked into the audit trail. It showed Jared's name. Not mine. Not his assistant. Jared. It wasn't just one thing anymore. It was a pattern. By Wednesday morning, day 3, I stopped asking, where's Jared? And started asking, who is moving things while he's gone? We were under the gun. Leadership wanted the client deck by noon. The vendor wanted confirmation on scope. Sales was breathing down my neck because the pricing exception affected their commission forecast. And my team, who normally looked to Jared to absorb the blowback, kept turning to me with that unspoken question. Are we safe? I tried to handle it like an adult. I wrote Jared a short email with the subject line, "Quick check-in," because anything more dramatic felt like tempting fate. I called once, let it ring, and hung up before voicemail, because leaving a message felt like documenting panic. I asked HR, casually, if he was on approved leave. HR replied with a sentence that sounded like it had been passed through legal first. "We don't share employee status information. Please proceed with your current reporting structure." That line told me more than it should have. If Jared had a family emergency, HR usually nudged someone quietly. "He's out for personal reasons. Route approvals to X." If he had taken PTO, his calendar would show it. If he'd been sick, his assistant would know. Instead, everyone was acting like the correct response was to pretend nothing had changed. By midday Wednesday, my team had done everything we could without him. We produced the deck anyway. We triple-checked numbers because there was no manager layer to catch mistakes. I sent it to leadership with a tight, neutral note. Final draft attached for review. I didn't mention that the reviewer was missing like a person in a true crime podcast. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't handle uncertainty. Corporate punishes that. And then right after I hit send, I got a calendar update. A meeting invite popped up for Friday, 3 p.m. Title: Alignment, Recent Process Gaps. Organizer: Jared. No explanation, no message. Just a meeting 2 days out, like he'd been here the whole time. I stared at the invite until my eyes went dry, and the only thought in my head was, if Jared was really gone, then someone wanted us all in a room pretending he wasn't. By Thursday morning, the office had shifted. Not loudly, not in any way you could point to. But people stopped asking me questions in Slack and started phrasing things like requests for permission. Sales stopped joking in meetings. Finance copied one extra person on emails, just in case. It felt like the building itself was bracing for impact, and then came the blame. At 9:03 a.m., leadership forwarded an email chain about the vendor scope change. No commentary, just the thread, dropped into my inbox like evidence on a table. I read it 3 times before replying, carefully line by line, explaining that the approval came from Jared's account during a period when he was unreachable, and that my team had not authorized any scope revisions. 5 minutes later, I got a reply from my director. "Understood. Let's discuss in alignment." That was it. No acknowledgement of the missing manager. No concern about approvals happening without visibility. Just a vague promise to discuss, which in corporate language means someone is already forming a narrative. By late morning, that narrative was leaking. Sales pinged me privately asking why operations was holding things up. A project manager asked if my team had missed a step in the workflow. Someone from legal requested documentation on recent deviations. Every message carried the same implication. Whatever was wrong, it lived downstream. With us. I felt the irritation before I could name it. That tight heat behind the eyes that comes when you realize you're being positioned. Not accused outright, never that, but gently nudged into the corner where responsibility collects like dust. So I stopped reacting and started recording. I pulled the vendor email and looked past the body to the metadata. Nothing dramatic, but the headers told a clean story. Sent from Jared's corporate address, authenticated properly, not spoofed. That ruled out a simple fake. I checked the timestamp against our VPN logs, not because I had access, but because I knew roughly when system maintenance happened. The email went out during a window when remote access required a token refresh. Interesting. I opened the internal approval tool and exported the audit trail. User, Jared. Action, approved. Device, registered corporate laptop. Location, office network. That last part bothered me. Jared hadn't been in the office all week. His badge hadn't pinged the building since the previous Friday. I knew because facilities sends weekly occupancy summaries, and I'd helped reconcile them once. Someone was approving things from inside the building. At lunch, I finally let myself feel angry. Not explosive anger. Controlled, cold anger. The kind that sharpens your attention instead of blurring it. I ate at my desk and replayed the week like footage. Jared vanishes. Approvals continue. Leadership acts like nothing's wrong. HR deflects. And now, quietly, responsibility is sliding downhill. I thought about doing the right thing, flagging the issue loudly, calling a meeting, demanding answers. I'd seen people do that before. They were remembered as difficult, emotional, not strategic, and they were usually gone within a year. So instead, I asked questions that couldn't be emotional. I emailed IT with a neutral request. Can you confirm whether delegated access is enabled on Jared's mailbox? Not an accusation, a configuration question. IT replied 2 hours later. Yes, delegate rules were active. Assigned months ago, standard practice for executives during travel. Delegated to whom? They couldn't tell me without manager approval. Of course. By Thursday afternoon, the meeting invite for Friday started filling up. Jared accepted. My director accepted. Someone from legal accepted. Someone from HR accepted. The title changed slightly. Alignment, process, and accountability. That word, accountability, was doing a lot of work. A colleague pulled me aside near the elevators and asked quietly, "Is Jared okay?" I told him the truth, which was also the safest answer. I don't know. He nodded like that explained everything. That night, at home, I opened my laptop again, not to work, but because I couldn't stop thinking about one detail. The internal approval tool logs device IDs. I didn't have admin access, but I did have old exports from a past project where we'd analyzed workflow latency. I dug them up and compared patterns. Jared's approvals always came from the same device ID. Always. Even when he traveled. The approvals this week came from that same device, which meant either his laptop was still in use or someone else had it. Friday morning arrived too fast. At 10:15 a.m., Jared finally replied to my quick check-in email from earlier in the week. Hey, been heads down. Let's sync at the meeting. No apology, no explanation. Just the assumption that silence was acceptable and that whatever had happened would be handled behind closed doors. I read the email once, then archived it. Not because I was done, but because I was finished waiting. By the time 3 p.m. came around, I wasn't irritated anymore. I was prepared, and I didn't know it yet. But the version of events they were planning to present required me to stay quiet, and I had already decided I wouldn't. The meeting didn't break me. What broke me was what happened an hour before it. At 1:58 p.m., while I was reviewing the deck one last time, a notification slid across my screen from the approval system. A new action, same project, same vendor. Status, pending manager review. I didn't touch it. I just watched. 2 minutes later, it flipped to approved. User, Jared. Device, same corporate laptop. Location, office network. That was the moment the story in my head finally collapsed. Not because it was shocking, but because it was too clean, too consistent. This wasn't chaos. This was control. If Jared had been heads down, he would have replied earlier. If he'd been sick, someone would have covered. If this were incompetence, there would be mistakes. Instead, everything that needed his approval kept moving, precisely when it needed to, and everything that created friction landed squarely on my team. I realized then that the disappearance wasn't a failure. It was a strategy. I stopped preparing defenses and started mapping intent. Jared's role gave him a specific kind of power. He wasn't the final decision maker, but he was the last human checkpoint before things went official. If something went wrong after his sign-off, the system showed he'd approved it, but if he claimed later that he'd been unreachable, distracted, or misrepresented, responsibility could slide downhill, especially if no one challenged the approvals in real time. Silence wasn't absence. Silence was cover. I pulled every artifact I could without tripping alarms. Email, timestamps, workflow logs, calendar metadata. not screenshots, exports, things with structure, things legal couldn't wave away as interpretation. I noticed something I'd missed earlier. The approvals during Jared's absence followed a tighter pattern than usual. No late-night scatter, no weekend noise. Everything happened during business hours. Someone was working a schedule. At 2:21 p.m., I did one thing that changed how the meeting would go. I forwarded the pending approval, not to leadership, not to Jared, but through the official escalation path that exists for one reason only. When an approval has compliance implications, it didn't accuse anyone. It didn't say fraud or misconduct. It simply flagged a dependency that required confirmation of approver availability. That action created a record outside Jared's control. 5 minutes later, my director slacked me. "Did you route something to compliance?" I replied. "Yes. It seemed appropriate given the timing. No emojis, no qualifiers. There was a pause long enough that I imagined him reading it twice. Then, okay. That was all." At 2:47 p.m., Jared sent a calendar update moving the meeting from 3 hours to 3:30. No explanation. At 3:12 p.m., legal added another attendee. I didn't feel nervous walking into the room. I felt strangely calm, like the moment after you accept a hard truth and stop arguing with it. Whatever this was going to be, I wasn't guessing anymore. Jared joined last, camera on, perfectly composed. He looked rested, not frantic, not apologetic. He smiled like someone returning from a productive offsite, not like someone who'd vanished for 5 days without telling anyone. "Thanks for making time," he said. "I know it's been a little messy." Messy, that word again. Like the problem was clutter, not intent. He launched into a smooth recap about process gaps and communication breakdowns. He talked about how the team had done great work under pressure, while subtly implying that the pressure existed because approvals hadn't been proactively managed. I watched the faces on the screen. My director nodded. HR stayed neutral. Legal didn't react at all. That told me who already knew this was more than a misunderstanding. Jared shared his screen and pulled up the vendor thread. The same email I'd seen, the one sent from his account during his absence. "As you can see," he said, "I approved the scope based on information available at the time." I let him finish. That mattered. Then I spoke, not to contradict him, but to add context. "Can I clarify one thing?" I said. "During the window when that approval was sent, were you actively working?" A harmless question. No accusation, just yes or no. Jared didn't answer immediately. "I was intermittently available," he said. "As I mentioned, I was heads down." "Understood," I replied. "Then just to confirm, your laptop was with you during that time?" There it was, the first hairline crack. "Yes," he said. "Of course." Legal's camera flickered on. I didn't press yet. I shared my screen and pulled up the workflow audit. I ask because the system shows the approval coming from the office network, not remote, and facilities records show no badge entry for you all week. Silence. Not awkward silence, calculating silence. Jared leaned back slightly. "That could be cached data," he said. "The system isn't always precise." "That's true," I agreed, which is why I didn't rely on a single data point. I clicked to the next slide. Email headers. Token refresh timing. The delegate rule IT had confirmed existed, but not who it was delegated to. Patterns, not accusations. I routed the latest approval through compliance, I continued. They can confirm whether delegated access was used during your absence. No one interrupted me? That was the tell. Jared stopped smiling. I felt it then, the shift. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. The story he'd planned required me to stay confused, to doubt myself, to accept the version where his silence was normal and the fallout was shared. That night, before the meeting, I'd stopped trying to be reasonable. I'd started trying to be accurate, and once accuracy enters the room, silence stops working. The room didn't explode. That's the part people get wrong when they imagine accountability. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, just a subtle reordering of attention, like gravity had shifted, and everyone felt it at once. Legal spoke first. Before we go further, she said, calm and precise, I'd like to pause the narrative and confirm a few facts. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at Jared. Were you physically present in the office at any point between Monday and Thursday of this week? Jared smiled again, smaller this time. I don't recall the exact days. That's okay, she replied. Facilities does. She shared her screen. Badge access logs, a simple table. Last entry, the previous Friday. No exits, no re-entries. 5 full business days of absence. Jared opened his mouth, then closed it. He leaned forward instead, elbows on the desk, posture shifting from confident to careful. Look, he said, this is turning into something bigger than it needs to be. I was dealing with a sensitive issue off-site. I didn't want to alarm the team. HR nodded slightly, the sympathetic reflex. Jared had always been good at that, framing secrecy as leadership. Legal didn't react. Understood, she said. Then the next question is simple. If you weren't on site and approvals were processed from an on-site device, who had access to your laptop? Jared exhaled through his nose. I don't appreciate the implication. It's not an implication, she replied. It's a control gap. That phrase landed hard. Control gap meant process failure. Process failure meant mandatory review. I stayed quiet. This wasn't my moment anymore. It never was. My job had been to make sure the right people had something they couldn't ignore. Now they did. Compliance spoke up next. We received an escalation regarding approver availability, tied to a pricing exception. That triggered a review of delegated access. She clicked to a new screen. A list of mailbox rules. One of them stood out. Created months ago, rarely used. Delegate. Executive oversight. My director stiffened. Legal's eyes moved slowly to him. So approvals were being actioned via executive delegation, she said, without disclosure to the project team. Jared jumped in. That's standard during travel. During declared travel, Legal corrected, which this was not. The chaos didn't come from noise. It came from velocity. Questions started stacking. Why was the delegation used selectively? Why only on items with financial exposure? Why were approvals happening strictly during office hours if Jared was supposedly remote? Why were vendors referencing conversations no one else was present for? Every answer Jared gave solved one problem and created 2 more. Then Legal asked the question that ended it. Were any of these approvals intended to finalize commitments prior to audit review? The room went very still. Jared didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was measured. I was trying to keep deals moving. By bypassing standard review, she said, and shifting operational risk. That was the moment his story broke. Not because of emotion, but because intent had become visible. My director tried once to soften it. Let's be fair. The team did miss. Legal cut him off. The team flagged inconsistencies. That's documented. What we're discussing now is unauthorized approval activity. No one defended Jared after that, not explicitly. They just stopped cushioning the fall. The meeting ended abruptly, not with a conclusion, but with instructions. Compliance would freeze the affected contracts. IT would secure devices. HR would schedule follow-ups. Legal would document findings. Jared left the call without saying goodbye. Within an hour, his Slack status went gray. By the end of the day, his calendar disappeared from shared view. The aftermath wasn't loud. It was procedural. Compliance emailed my team confirming we were cleared of responsibility for the scope change. Finance retracted the revised forecast. Sales stopped pinging me. HR sent a short note thanking me for raising concerns through appropriate channels. The executive who'd been delegated access stopped attending our meetings. No announcement, just absence. That night, I walked out of the building later than usual. The office was quiet again, but different. The wrong silence had been replaced by the right kind. The kind that comes after something broken has been removed. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty in a clean way, like after you finally stop carrying something heavy and your muscles don't know what to do yet. Jared's 5 missing days were never about disappearing. They were about trying to move pieces in the dark and hoping no one would turn on the lights. He'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to make the system tell the truth. And once it did, everything else followed. The quiet came a week later. Not the dramatic kind, no announcement, no company-wide email with careful phrasing, just the absence of Jared's name from places it used to sit. The org chart updated overnight. His approvals stopped appearing in systems. His parking badge deactivated. The company didn't explain what happened, because companies rarely do. They just move forward and let people fill in the blanks they're allowed to see. What mattered to me was what arrived in my inbox on Monday morning. An email from legal. Short. Precise. Attached was a memo stating that my team had no responsibility for the unauthorized approvals, no accountability for the scope change, and no performance impact from the incident. The language wasn't warm, but it was final. The kind of document that doesn't invite reinterpretation later. I forwarded it to my team without commentary. They didn't reply right away. Then one by one messages came in. Not celebratory, just relieved. Thanks for having our backs. Appreciate you not letting that land on us. Glad that's on record. That was enough. By Wednesday, HR scheduled a brief meeting with me. Not an investigation. A transition. They framed it as an opportunity, an interim reporting change, expanded scope, a temporary dotted line while leadership realigned. It came with a title adjustment and a compensation review date, neither of which I asked for. I accepted both without emotion. Titles come and go. Paper trails last. The executive who'd been quietly attached to Jared's delegation was reassigned to a different division. Officially, it was part of a reorganization. Unofficially, he stopped replying to messages and avoided eye contact when our paths crossed. He wasn't punished publicly. He didn't need to be. He'd lost proximity, and in this place, that was consequence enough. The vendor deal was rebid. Properly this time. The pricing exception went through review. Sales recalculated their forecasts. The world didn't end. No one lost their job downstream, which confirmed what I'd suspected all along. The pressure Jared claimed justified his shortcuts had never been real. It was urgency manufactured to outrun scrutiny. A month later, I ran into his assistant in the lobby. She looked lighter, like someone who'd set something down without realizing how heavy it had been. We exchanged small talk. She didn't mention his name. Neither did I. I never found out where Jared had gone during those 5 days. I don't need to. The point wasn't his location. It was his assumption that silence could absorb risk, that systems were tools for leverage instead of records of truth, that the people beneath him would stay confused long enough for it to work. He miscalculated one thing. He assumed I wanted protection. What I wanted was clarity. There's a difference between being passive and being patient. For a long time, I'd been patient. I'd believed that if you stayed reasonable, did good work, and avoided drama, things would balance out on their own. That week cured me of that illusion. Systems don't reward virtue. They reward documentation. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't outmaneuver a villain. I just refused to carry ambiguity that wasn't mine. I asked boring questions. I followed dull procedures. I made the invisible visible and then stepped back. That's how real consequences happen. A few weeks after everything settled, I cleaned out an old folder on my desktop. Inside were the exports, the logs, the timelines. I didn't need them anymore. I archived them to cold storage and closed the folder. Not out of mercy, but because the record already existed where it mattered. On my last day reporting through that chain, I left the office at a normal hour. No late-night adrenaline, no victory lap, Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that if anyone ever tried to rewrite that week, the system wouldn't let them. My manager vanished for 5 days. What he didn't realize was that while he was gone, the story stopped being his to control. And when he finally showed up to explain it, the truth was already waiting.